Hindsight is 20/20, a majority of the time. On Tuesday, January 19th, 2010, the First Baptist Church of Temple's main sanctuary was set ablaze by an arsonist. The people of First Temple were blindsided. This building had been standing on the same plot of ground for almost 140 years, and without warning they had just lost it. Most people would assume the church had lost some major part of itself, some part of its being. In a way, those people might be right, but the people of First Temple would bounce back, and so would the church. The following people are people who remember the fire from 3 different perspectives.
My name is Mary Ann Barrett. I'm with First Baptist Church Temple. I'm the financial assistant.
My name is Gary Anthony. I'm the worship and care pastor here at First Baptist Church Temple.
Hey, I'm Evan Duncan. I'm the teaching pastor here at First Temple.
Before the fire, what would you say the state of the church would be when it comes to financially, spiritually, diversity?
While I was there, the church was dying. There was not a lot of growth at all. I think maybe the year before the fire, there was 1 child under the age of 10 in the whole church. So that kind of tells you about the health of the church. It was an older church. It was kind of what you would expect from an old downtown First Baptist. It did not look good.
So First Baptist Church Temple was downtown. It was running in the low 400s. It had been a very stable congregation, but it hadn't seen a whole lot of growth in a number of years recently. It was older. It represented what we might say old temple. It was not able to reach a younger crowd very much at that point. Spiritually, they were strong. There were some wonderful, wonderful people who some of them are still here, deeply spiritual, deeply committed to Christ. But diversity, they were not diverse at all. We were pretty much an Anglo congregation, older in set.
It was definitely not the best that we had been at. We were starting to lose members. It was kind of stagnant. There was trouble trying to come forward to a more modern worship. The fire definitely got rid of that. The fire made so many things change so quickly, but it was in a good way.
How did you find out about the fire?
I got a phone call at 5:41 in the morning. My cell phone went off, and it was a member who had worked with me before. They were on their way to work and had seen the fire trucks, and they called me and they said, "Gary, you need to know that the church is on fire." That woke me up pretty quickly. I immediately called my pastor. His wife answered the phone as if it was in the middle of the day. And I said, "Is it true?" That's all I asked. "Is it true?" And she said, "Yes, the church is on fire." I hung up the phone. I got dressed. I jumped in my car and I was standing on the parking lot that morning at 3 minutes after 6 in downtown and stood there and watched the glowing embers over the roof and the firemen fighting the fire at that point. It wasn't too much longer that the roof caved in of the main building.
So it was a Tuesday morning, and I had been off Monday for the holiday, and so I got up, I was getting ready, and I was thinking of 1.5 million things I had to do that day, and the phone rang, and it was the pastor's assistant, and she told me not to rush in because there was a little fire that the firemen were there to take care of, and to just take our time. And I asked her a couple questions she obviously did not know the answers to, about what to wear and what I should do, and so then jump forward about 15 minutes. My husband had left for work, and as he's driving into Temple to go to work, he's on a bridge and he sees the fire from the bridge, and he calls me and he's like, "Mayor, it's not a little fire." And I think you better figure out what's going on.
The church was meeting in 2 separate locations. Did the church ever feel divided during that time?
So As a leader during that time, we were very concerned about what might seem divided. 3 different services were going on at 3 different times. One was at 8, well, it was at 8 o'clock. And then there were 2 services taking place at 11. One was a contemporary service, one was what we would call our traditional service, once again, at the Methodist Church. It was very difficult to keep everybody together. The life groups, Sunday school classes, what we call life groups, were meeting all over town, so you'd have to go to one place in town to do that and then come back. We were kind of spread out. Some of our folks said we don't want to do that anymore, so we saw some decline at that point. Some people came because they were like, we want to be a part of that. But we worked very hard at trying to create a sense of this is who we are, we're all together, we want to be together. But even when you're meeting in different places and at different times, I would not necessarily say that it was divisive, but we were very well aware that there were different congregations that were still a part of First Baptist Temple because they were simply meeting at different times and we never saw one another.
There was a division. I feel like it was a little harder because they never grouped together very often. We'd try to have socials or try to have I think Easter Sunday one time we had it on the property out here so people could see and greet each other. But it definitely felt a little like 2 different churches. But the 2 churches worked wonderful and the people were great. And especially in Pirtle, they had to set up and take everything down every week. And it was a lot of work, but it was done willingly. And a lot of people really enjoyed it. And it was exciting, but it was definitely had the feeling of 2 churches. So when this church opened, it was amazing because everyone could finally come together as one, which was really cool.
Was the fire the best thing to ever happen to the church? Why or why not?
Yeah, I do think that the fire was the best thing that could have happened to the church. It was devastating and tragic, and I would not wish it upon anyone. And I know what the staff had to go through was brutal. And it's great that nobody was injured or anything like that. So we can say that it was really good because at the end of the day, it forced us to get out of the box and to move forward and really commit to who we are and what God was calling us to be. It reminds me of all kinds of passages in Scripture when God talks about the nation of Israel and as they're wandering in the wilderness, that in the wilderness God reached down and taught His people how to walk. I think that's what happened to First Temple. The fire happened and we were in the wilderness, and it's when you're in the wilderness that you're closest to God. And so in the midst of all that, it led us to do things like start the church service at the school. It led us to things like decide to build a campus out here in West Temple. It led us to be open to doing church in a way that was different, that didn't have all the former expectations, that was more open to different kinds of folks. It led us to reaching people. I mean, the reality is now we look at what God is doing in this place. 98 people were baptized at First Temple this year. I mean, that's wild. We've seen growth. I mean, in 2016, we were named one of the fastest growing churches in America. This is wild stuff of a church that was dying.
I always have a real when I hear the statement, the fire was the best thing to ever happen to the church, it always causes me to cringe inside just a little bit. I cringe because it gives the idea that it needed to happen. It gives the idea that it was necessarily a good thing. I can tell you, being involved very directly with that, losing many of my personal items as well as all of our ministry items during that time, starting ministry over with absolutely nothing. I can tell you that I cringe because I think, okay, wait a minute, there had to be another way. My take on that is, of course, the fire was started by an arsonist. So somebody sought to do harm to the congregation. I look back at that and I say, what someone intended to harm God was able to change that around and create something very beautiful out of ashes. That's what God does. That's how God functions. That's how God works in our lives. But to simply say it's the best thing that ever happened to us, it makes me cringe. God was able to turn it around. God was able to bring glory out of it. But I don't believe that God wanted that to happen in the ultimate scheme of things.
I agree to some extent. It's sad that it happened because of so much that was lost, but it was exciting, and they had already been talking about moving or having 2 campuses in the future. So it did help the congregation come back together to realize that what they wanted and how it was going to happen, and the steps that were going to be taken to really make it all come together, and just it really worked out well.
In the days and months following the fire, were there any specific moments that you can remember where you knew that God was with the congregation and the church?
There was a closeness. There was an intimacy. The people had to hold on to each other because, I mean, this is foundation shaking stuff that happened, you know. I got to hear stories of people talking about how their kids were baptized in the building and they were married in the building. And yet through all of that, I kept hearing them say things like, but the church isn't a building. And I saw that this would not be the end of First Temple that day. And that was because God was at work in our midst, in the people.
Initially, those days immediately following the fire, the fire happened on a Tuesday. All throughout that week, we kind of walked around in this literal cloud, no pun intended, just trauma, post-traumatic syndrome, you might even say, of not knowing how do we function, what do we do, how do we go. And part of that for me was just asking the Lord to show himself to me, to show himself to us as a staff and to us as a congregation. I remember one particular thing that Thursday morning, 2 days after the fire, we had sat in a meeting, and we knew that we had to plan worship, and I didn't even have a book to plan worship. And I didn't have a hymnal. I had my Bible at home, but I didn't have any other thing to plan worship. And I thought, what am I going to do? And our pastor at the time looked at me and said, well, you need to make a list of what you need, and we'll get it. And so I was sitting in that meeting, and I made a list of 9 things. I thought, okay, if I'm going to plan worship, this is what I need to function here. And so I made a list of 9 things that I was going to need, and I didn't quite know how I was going to get them, but anyway, I thought, okay, we'll start there. All throughout the morning in that meeting, our phones had been going off as they had been for the last 48 hours. So we had kind of put them on silence, and we said we'd answer those later. I came out of that meeting and picked up my phone and started to get those messages. And there was a message on my phone from a friend of mine in Killeen, and he called me and left a message, and he said, hey, Gary, I was thinking about you, and I thought you might need some things. I didn't know what you were going to do in planning worship, and I thought, hey, you might need some things that I might have. And so he said, I'm coming to Temple today, and I'm going to bring you some stuff. He said, I have a box sitting on my desk, and this is what I put in the box to bring you. On that message, he listed 9 things. Not only were they the 9 things that I had written on the piece of paper, but they were the exact order that I had written them, all the way down the page. And he recited those over the message. And I stopped in my tracks in the parking lot that day, and I just wept, because I knew that was, in a sense, to me, the Holy Spirit saying, we're going to take care of this. We're going to be with you through this. Don't fear. I know how this is going. You're going to make it.
This coming January will be the 9-year mark of their beautiful building downtown being destroyed. The resilience of this church and of these people is unprecedented and remarkable. The church has grown in ways no one ever thought possible. From a church with 400 people on a Sunday to a church with over 1,000 people every Sunday. Something is to be said about that. It's easy to see now that being strong and trusting God through the hard times has paid off. The church has grown, we've reached more people. Again, it's easy to look back and say, I'm glad we did what we did, and I'm glad we trusted God. But then again, hindsight is almost always 20/20.